Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Kathy Bass, your host and a League member. Each program we talk about public policy issues, so you can inform yourselves and be ready to go vote Omaha. Today we're talking with Mike Kennedy, the president of the Millard School Board, about the property tax levy override. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me this evening.
It's a pleasure. We're going to dive right into these questions.
All right.
Okay. Voters are being asked to pass a property tax levy override. So can you tell us what is this levy override and what would the tax levy do? What would it do?
Well, let's first talk about what the difference is between a bond issue and a levy override. Usually the Millard voters have been asked several times to, over the years, help build schools, new facilities, and we take out bonds of 20, 30 years in length to pay off those structures. A lid levy override is slightly different. What that allows us to do is use money for the daily operations for our budget out of the normal tax base for the year. For example, every year a city council, a school board sets your property taxes for the year. This would give Millard the authority to levy up to 9 cents more from what the state cap is right now at $1.05.
Okay, so you're telling me this is different than a bond, so go a little bit more into what the bond would do.
Okay, so if you did a bond, it would be like roofs, HVAC systems, parking lots. So when homeowners do something to their house, get the new windows, put on a new roof, those are long-term projects. So usually take out a second mortgage or an equity line of credit to take care of that. That's what bonds are. A lid levy override isn't borrowing money. It's asking the taxpayers to pay a little bit extra on their property taxes for the general operations, and that would be classroom instruction and programs.
Okay, good. I appreciate the difference there.
Sure.
Please tell me how Millard School District is funded and how does its funding compare to other school districts?
Well, it's kind of complex. There's two different main sources of revenue. Every school district gets a little bit of federal aid, and that's for some special programs, but really the bulk of it is two things: state aid from the Nebraska unicameral and the local property taxpayer. What's happened in Millard is this. Millard has been up against a freeze. We have grown over 1,200 students since 2009, yet we've received the exact same amount of state aid, which was approximately $75 million back in 2009. And this year, it's $75 million in 2017. Not only have we grown 1,200 students, which is approximately filling 3 new elementary schools, we've also gained in poverty. In 2009, Millard had approximately 3,000 students that are in poverty, and we've grown by another 2,000 students. That's happened to school districts across the Omaha area. There's been a rise in that, but usually there's been a reciprocating increase in state aid. For example, OPS and Lincoln Public Schools, their state aid's increased approximately 40 to 60% over that 7-year period. Millard hasn't increased at all. And we're not saying in Millard that OPS or Lincoln Public Schools doesn't deserve it. They have many challenges within their own district with poverty and other issues to deal with, but all we're saying is we've grown, we have more students in poverty, we should have some more state aid. The other side of it with the property taxes, it's slightly different. For the fact is there's been a brouhaha the last couple of years with the assessor's office. That's something a school district, a city council, or other property tax entity doesn't have any control over. So for whatever reason, even though sales and homes in Millard have increased dramatically and the prices of those houses have increased dramatically, we only had about a 2% increase in the base according to the assessor's office. And I'll give you an example, my own house. I bought a house in Greenfield, it's a nice 4-bedroom house, about 156th and Dodge, 2 years ago for $220,000. my house was valuated at a little over $190,000. This year it went backwards. Even though houses in my neighborhood that sold for $220 2 years ago when we bought our house, now going for $250, $260. So that's something the school district doesn't control. So if your revenues from the tax assessments are flat and state aid is flat, you still have increase in regular costs. Salaries, busing, energy, school supplies, all those things, and adding 1,200 more kids, we're up against a budget crunch.
Okay. Do any of the other districts do a levy override?
Westside has done it for years. In fact, they just had, I think, their 4th or their 5th levy override.
Okay. And how much does the budget grow every? I mean, we were just kind of talking about this, but how much does it grow every year, and what causes the growth?
Okay, well, let's talk a couple things. One, Millard's budget is kind of unique. So when 2009 is our base year, because that's when we went into the learning community, and then we came out of the learning community for budget purposes about a year ago. Our average budget growth during that time, despite adding 1,200 kids, has been 1.2% a year. That's much lower than most other school districts and the city of Omaha, the state of Nebraska. One of the reasons why it's so low is because we've been up against our lid, which is $1.05.
Okay.
Okay, and if we don't get increases in state aid, and if we don't get increases in property valuation, we can only levy $1.05, and so that's what we've been up against. So you're going to say, well, how did Millard get through those times? We have cut. We have cut programs. We've cut in Latin in our schools. We've cut Japanese. We cut our Culinary Institute that we put together that was tied in with Metro. We've cut instructional facilitators that help kids that need that additional assistance in reading. We've had to cut positions there. We've cut administrators. We've cut cleaning staff. In total, even though we've grown 1,200 students, we've cut over 50 positions in our district to make things balance.
I kind of answered a little bit of that, but what has changed in the budget over the years as far as, please talk about the money received from the learning community, since that's,
Okay.
and then state funding and money from property and sales tax.
Well, the state of Nebraska is pretty much broke. We have a downturn in the ag economy, and I will say this, we're very appreciative of what Governor Rick gets appropriated for state aid for schools. The university was cut, the state colleges were cut, the TIOSA aid, which is the aid to K through 12 school districts, the governor actually gave a 2% increase. You're going to say, well, Mike, that's great. Well, it is, except for the funding formula, which is called TIOSA, is so geared towards poverty, most of the 2% was put to those areas, and Millard actually had a $2 million cut this year, even though the overall budget for state aid by the state was up 2%. So we actually had a $2 million cut within our state aid for this year, and we can't control that. There's 49 state senators and the governor that sets that policy. And then on the other side is, like I was talking about before with Dan Badiato's office, the assessments haven't been keeping track with sales. So with only a 1.98% growth in Douglas County in the Millard area, and when I say a percent, it's usually worth $1 million. So if your property tax valuation only goes up about 2%, that's $2 million. And then state aid went down $2 million, you lost that too. Our budget this year, revenue, on a $225 million budget, we only had an increase in revenues of $49,000.
Okay.
And to put that into perspective, our teachers association is wonderful. They don't want the cuts to hit the classroom. Our teachers' total package this year was 2.98% increase. You're going to say, well, 3% raise is great, Mike. Well, when we say package, that includes all their benefits. Health insurance, which is raising, and all that. So basically, we had a 3% increase in our costs, and yet we had only $49,000 coming extra into our budget. So we tapped our reserves a little bit this year, and then we cut more positions. And that's the only way we're going to be able to do it, is cutting positions.
Well, how has enrollment affected your budget? Is the enrollment expected to grow, decrease in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we're almost becoming like what West Side was about 20, 25 years ago. West Side matured, Millard grew around it. We're in the same position now. Almost all of our available land, except for the old Boys Town property and the farm over there, everything else has been built out. So we'll continue to grow slightly, but really the growth districts are Papillion, Gretna, Elkhorn. So Millard's going to be around that 24, 25,000 kid level for the future, but we're still going to keep adding about maybe a couple hundred kids every year.
Okay. And then what is the significance? I mean, besides just numbers, how else is that going to affect the budget?
Well, one thing is because we're not growing fast, we get no extra credit in the state aid.
Okay.
So we won't gain revenues that way. The other thing is we're going to still be filling up classrooms because we're not going to build any more buildings. We're done building out. So we're going to add kids to the same classrooms. So our classroom sizes are going to increase.
What about adjustments to those buildings that are there? Or
Well,
if the class is going to increase, at some point you can't put more kids in there.
That's it. We went away from portables about 12 years ago and finished those projects about 8 years ago. But if we have to increase putting kids into buildings, that could be an issue. The other thing is our last series of bond issues, we built out our buildings significantly. So we decided not to have a 4th high school for operational purposes. It costs money to have a principal, staff, and all that. So we put a 500 student addition onto Millard West several years ago. Millard North, we've done some additions too, and the same with Millard South. So we run our high schools very big. In fact, Millard North is about 2,500 kids. Millard West is about 2,400, and Millard South is about 2,300. So our schools are very full.
Okay. I want to talk about state aid a little bit
Yeah.
more. State aid is crucial. It's part of your budget. Talk about the changes you think you're going to be seeing.
Well, here's part of the problem. This is one of the reasons why Millard ran into a problem with state aid. We used to get in state aid about $12 million for some differences here. And in fact, I brought one of our Millard fact sheets here. And we used to get what's called an elementary class size allowance. And that was about $5.6 million. And what the state of Nebraska said over 10 years ago was, in those K-2 classrooms, if you run 20 students or less, because having a teacher hands-on with young children is a good idea, you would get a bonus. So Millard purposely kept our class sizes in those early grades at 20 or less students. We also got $4.1 million for our instructional time. To get our rigorous curriculum in, we needed more school days. So Millard added school days to the calendar to take advantage of that. And finally, teacher education adjustment. And I think this is the real shame what the legislature did back in 2012 is Millard got $2.4 million a year to have teachers that are highly qualified and get their masters. Over 70% of our educators have their masters. And when you get your master's, you're entitled to a little bit higher salary. And people go, oh, well, the teachers are only doing that because they want the pay. No, we want very highly qualified teachers. Furthermore, we have a lot of AP, early college, international baccalaureate, and dual enrollment classes in our high schools that require the educator to have that master's or the additional hours in that subject area. So when the state took that back, we weren't going to go back on our promises to our educators that took the time to get the training that they needed to teach those classes. And I'll tell you, that $12 million cut to us that happened in 2012 and 2013 has reverberated through our programs for the last 3 years. We have been in cutting mode ever since then because that allowed Millard to be able to have the high quality programs that we have.
Okay. Now, talked about a little bit about state aid already too, but does the state aid formula favor the poorer districts, or does it favor a high level of poverty? Does it? How does that affect the budget?
It's mostly high level poverty.
Okay.
And I want to be very clear is every district takes the children that comes through their doors. And we don't begrudge other districts for getting money to help those students succeed. We have to have an educated population, and having that extra money with English language learners, ESL students, and other kids that need help, it's it's acceptable to put money towards that, but the problem is the formula's gotten so skewed that OPS has had a 60% increase in funding from the state, and Millard is at 0.
No increase.
No increase.
Okay.
No increase since from 2009 to then. And LPS has had a 60% increase too. Now, I'll keep in mind too, they've had a little bit higher growing population. So what Millard is trying to say is this: maybe Millard should have got a 5 or an 8 or a 10% increase. We're not saying cut anything from those other districts, but you got to realize that there are districts that don't have as high a poverty but still need that money. And I think there's something that people need to know as well. Millard, out of 245 school districts in the state, is the 3rd from the bottom in per pupil spending. We're almost $2,000 a kid below the state average, okay? And that's very important. So when people go, wow, Millard has such great schools, great programs, they must be spending a fortune. We're not. We spend it very efficiently, but it's come to the time where you can only be so efficient, and if you don't have some type of minimal increase, it's going to affect the programs.
You just alluded to my next question, which was we're talking about per pupil spending.
Yeah.
So why is it important? And how does Millard per pupil spending compare to the other districts, which you just said is the 3rd lowest? But so how are you making those efficiencies?
Well, I will tell you a couple things that we made a decision years ago. Instead of building the 4th high school out at 204th and Q, we bought 50 acres of land to develop that. We decided, no, we don't have the funds in the long term. We're going to run our high schools bigger. Now, there's some advantages to that, too. For example, my son started Millard North last year. He's a very bright kid in math. He was able to start in Honors Algebra 2 as a freshman. Now, his father went to a local Catholic high school. I don't think I got through Honors Algebra 2 until I was a senior. Since we run about 600 kids in a class, we can have basic math, consumer math, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Honors Algebra 1, Honors Algebra 2, and have a whole host of classes available for student whatever level that they're learning at, and yet not increase the budget. So there's an advantage of running a big high school.
Okay.
The disadvantages, though, is this. You know, not everyone can make the football team. Some of the activities are a little bit more packed. But the thing is, our parents crave having those extra programs. And where it's really made a big difference is our AP programs. We have some of the highest numbers in AP scholars. We have over 400 students in our junior and senior classes that have been designated as AP scholars. And I'll give you another interesting statistic. We have 7% of the seniors in the state of Nebraska. We have 28% of the AP exams that are taken. And that just didn't happen overnight. We adopted and embraced an AP culture a decade ago. And that's important because our kids, when they leave Millard, they're college and career ready. And I think that's the most important part of education. So let's tie it back to those efficiencies. Millard is actually able to have champagne programs on a beer budget. And we're talking Costco light beer. It is. It really is. It's because of those efficiencies. So why we're asking the voters to go with the levy override is saying, look, you've seen our programs. You see that we spend so little on a per pupil basis. We have one of the lowest property tax overall rates in the city. Trust the board, trust the administration, and allow us to be able to levy up to 9 cents.
All right, let's talk about your critics a little bit. Some of them have questioned how the district has managed its budget, and what budget changes have been made to avoid asking for the tax increase. You've alluded to some, but in more detail.
And I think those are legitimate concerns because I think when you go, and this is one of the reasons why the state law is written this way, just like your bonds and a levy override, go to your community and see if that's what they really want to do. And so that's what we're doing here. So for our critics, we've cut over 50 positions. We have one of the lowest increases in expenditures over the last 7 years. It's 1.2%. And for those that are very conservative, Governor Ricketts has what I call the Ricketts rule. He said local government shouldn't grow by more than 3% a year. We agree with the governor. Millard has been at 1.2% since 2009. So I think even the most fiscally conservative person in the world would look at Millard and say, hey, look, you've done this on a shoestring budget. You have some of the highest test scores, the highest number of AP scholars. You have all these kids that graduate from school and are college and career ready. Why not trust the Board of Education? And that's what we've been doing. So for those critics, if they came and looked at how we run our district, and I'll give you another example. We only have one stadium for 3 big high schools. There's been a push across the state to make sure every high school has its own stadium. We didn't do that because we thought it was more important to invest in the classroom. So we have a nice stadium at Buell. The other 2 schools can travel to Millard South to play their games, but we thought it was more important to invest in our kids than invest in activities. And that's what we've kind of done here. So if they've seen how Millard has spent their money over the years, they'll see exactly that fiscal conservatism that I've talked about.
You mentioned cutting positions and 50 positions and some of these other efficiencies. Have you seen any of these cuts affecting the students?
Yeah, and I will tell you this. Our administration does a very good job, and I think the Board of Education has done a great job masking the cuts. So we have tried to make our cuts in areas that are the furthest from the classroom. What changed this past year in the round of cuts that we made, they started affecting the classrooms. We started cutting actual classroom teaching positions. We cut reading and math interventionists that help kids that struggle. Millard isn't just about having these high achieving programs in AP, early college and all that. We're about educating all of our students. So when you have a child that's struggling in kindergarten, first and second grade that needs that reading interventionist, that's the time to get it done. So we are going to be making more cuts in those areas and in the high ability learner classes. And that will fundamentally change our district.
Got just a couple more questions before I get to my last few.
Sure.
If the levy override is passed, will it prevent the need for future bond issues for buildings and other infrastructure?
No, but let's talk about the two. There's a difference here. This is for operations. And I want to stress to the community this. This is an insurance policy. If state aid gets rectified, if the assessments go up, we won't take advantage of the windfall. This isn't meant to bring back what we've already cut. This is a preservation budget.
Okay.
We're going to continue what we're doing now, okay? And I think that people need to understand is this levy override money is just for operations. However, we passed about 3-4 years ago a bond issue. There's enough money left over from that bond issue for another 3 years to do our maintenance projects. We're done building big schools. We've renovated most of our schools. We're not in the same position like that West Side and OPS are, where they have to tear down 50-year buildings. We're not going to be doing that. So our bond levies are starting to go down because we're paying off our debt. And then when we go to future bond levies down the road, when we go for those issuances, they're going to be much smaller because those are going to be painting, roofs, things of that nature, not like building a new high school or middle school, which like West Side and OPS has had to do.
Now, you're wanting to levy up to 9 cents per, or 9 cents per $100 property value.
Up to.
Up to. So am I going to, how much increase am I probably going to see if I'm going? And then after that, I'm going to do this one quick because I've got a couple more I really want to ask. But how much am I going to see that whole 9 cents right now?
Well, I will tell you this, you wouldn't see it off the bat. And if the valuations come in next year like they were supposed to this year, we wouldn't even be having this discussion today. So if the valuations increase dramatically in Douglas County, then we may only tench 1, 2, 3 cents. If something doesn't change down the road, the board can only access up to 9 cents. Okay. And I think it's important is there's a sunset provision. It's 5 years. So if you vote for this, we only have the authority for 5 years, and it has to go for a revote if we need it.
Okay. What happens if it does not pass? This override doesn't pass for some reason.
Be very simple here. We only had $49,000 increase in revenue this year. We had to borrow $2.5 million from our reserves. On a $225 million budget with a 3% growth rate, you're looking a little over $6 million. We will have to cut anywhere between $4 to $6 million from our budget. Well, you can't turn off all the lights. You can't cut so much copy paper. It's going to be positions. And I don't want to get into what those are, but this is what's going to happen. We're going to listen to our voters. If they say yes, we're going to be fine. We'll keep our preservation continuation budget. If they say no, we can't afford it, the Board of Education has the duty to balance its budget. We're going to go to our community and say, which programs do we need to cut?
Okay.
And these type of cuts are going to be across the board. They're not just going to be one area or the other area.
Okay, we have just a few more minutes, or 2 minutes left probably. We're going to show the budget link, or the ballot language up on the screen right now, so that, and if you could talk through any of the details, and I don't have it in front of me myself.
And here's what's fine about it. It talks about two different things. The Board of Education can levy up to 9 cents and spend up to $9 million. That gives you the authority to tax and the authority to spend. And like I told you earlier, 1 cent is equal to about $1 million. It's kind of nice how that works out for the Millard area. So that's what you're voting for. You're giving the Board of Education the authority every year to vote up to 9 cents, and then you're giving the Board of Education to be able to spend up to $9 million, whatever is raised from the levy, if we levy it.
Okay, and this is a mail-in ballot.
It's a mail
Those went
ballot.
out on Monday, so they should have them in their homes. So, and they have to return them by when?
Okay, so this is very important for everybody, whether you're going to vote for it or against it, and I want everybody to vote for it. This is really important for our community. But if you want to participate, you need to put a stamp on it, sign the back, mail it back to your election commissioner. We are in Douglas and Sarpy County. We have a small portion in Sarpy County. So you make sure you get back to your election commissioner, or you can take it to a ballot box location, which is the Sarpy County Election Commissioner's Office, the Douglas County Election Commissioner's Office, and the Millard Public Schools Foundation at 158th and Q Street.
Okay, so if they want any more, voters want any more information, where should they go?
All right, there's two areas they can go. The school district can give information. So if you want to go online to the Millard Public Schools page, we give a very informative overview of what our financial needs are and all that, but then we also have a parent organization. They can look for Millard Parents for Excellence. They can look at that and get the information there. And it's on Facebook, it's on the web. There's a lot of resources there for people.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, that's it for our show for the League of Women Voters. Thank you. And remind yourself to learn about the issues and go vote, Omaha.